Welcome back into the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. The day has finally come. We are going to talk a little bit about the Celtics. And unfortunately, or fortunately for me, I should say, they played really well last night. So the rip job I was planning on doing on them is going to, I guess, have to wait until next week when they inevitably disappoint me, Sap. But they did have a massive win last night against the Miami Heat, who had been looking like the best team in basketball. And then the Celtics on the second night of a back-to-back with Jayson Tatum playing like crap in Miami's home building, managed to take care of Miami for pretty much the whole game, Sap. They ended up winning 95-78, and that's the second consecutive game they've held a team to under 80 points. So are the Celtics doing something right now, Sap?
Well, they may have become interested in playing defense at some point, which is critical to their success. Miami is one of the best, if not the best, defensive teams in basketball. So in that sense, you're going to have to D up against them because they're going to hold you down. And last night, Miami held the Celtics to 95 points. But fortunately for the Celtics, they held Miami to 78 points. And it really does work on the defensive end. That's the most important thing. And the Celtics should have a decent defense, right? I'm not saying they're going to be the best defensive team in the league, but they have good defensive components. Marcus Smart and Al Horford, I think, are both good defenders. Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum can be good defenders. Dennis Schroeder has a good feel for the game as a defensive player. They should be able to be a defensive team. And again, Rob Williams has a good feel really on both ends of the floor. So they should have a good defensive team. It's about communication. It's about commitment. Those are the most important things. And last night and the prior game against Orlando, I'm not even going to count because Orlando looks like a G League team at some point. But going up against Miami, who we all agree is one of the best teams in basketball, they really took it to them on both ends of the floor. And it was the biggest win of the year. You could still knock the Celtics because the prior 8 games were kind of mind-blowing unto themselves. And they still showed some issues in that victory over Miami, but it got them right for the time being. But I have to see them come out against Dallas over the weekend and continue that type of play going forward if they're really a serious team in the Eastern Conference.
Oh, yeah. I don't think they've answered any questions definitively. You know, a win against Miami is certainly nice, and it was very unexpected, but it doesn't make up for some of the baffling losses they've had this year. And, I don't think you can in the NBA. I think you turn a corner gradually. I don't think you turn a corner overnight. And, the prior, so they've held the past 2 opponents, as I said, to under 80 points. But prior to that, Sap, the 4 games prior, they gave up 129, 116, 115, and 128. So, I mean, I don't think that it's possible to suddenly be like, oh, yeah, we can play defense now. And then that's going to be what you expect the rest of the way. I'm not going to say it's a complete fluke to beat, Miami, because they did do things right. And, I think the Celtics do have some talent, but they're going to have to do this a lot more consistently for me to buy in that suddenly, this team has figured something out and, it shifted gears to a completely different level that I didn't think was possible. To me, the losses this year have been far more alarming than that Miami win. So I like you said, we're gonna have to see how they do against Dallas over the weekend. They play Toronto again next week, who they got blown out by in their home opener earlier this season. So I'm curious to see how they do against them. I do think that there's right now, take away the Miami win, there's a lot more to not like about the team than to like about it. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's only fair to rip part of them, but at least they do have something today to finally feel good about.
Isn't that the frustrating part, though? Because they can do that. And they did it last night against an elite team. Meanwhile, they've lost the teams that they should beat. They had 2 tough games against Washington. And Washington's been a slight surprise this year, but you shouldn't lose twice to Washington. At least split with them. That's what you normally do. Toronto came in the home opener and kicked your butt. And now Toronto looks like a better team than we anticipated because I think Scotty Barnes has been much better than we expected. He was the 4th overall pick, and he's playing like the 4th overall pick. But it showed you last night that they can do that. I look at the defensive end because the offensive end eventually should take care of itself. You have two all-star caliber players in Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Al Horford's a good spacer. I was really enthused to see Aaron Nesmith and Romeo Langford play last night and contribute. And again, you're looking at two players, Jet, that were picked 14th in their respective draft. And you look at what the Miami Heat have gotten from their drafts in the same basic slot in the first round. Bam Adebayo was the 14th pick in his draft, and he's an all-star caliber player. Tyler Hero was the 13th overall pick in his draft, one spot before Romeo Langford. He's off to a great start this year. Meanwhile, Nesmith and Romeo Langford, who were both 14th overall, it's the last pick in the lottery, they really haven't contributed. Well, last night they combined for 45 minutes, 9 of 16 from the floor, 5 of 10 from three, and they combined for 26 points. And they give you energy, and Langford can give you defense. Nesmith is probably the best, I wouldn't go as far as saying maybe the best pure shooter on the team, but he's right there. Get contribution from those guys. Let's see them play. I mean, we don't need to see Josh Richardson. He's a veteran. You kind of know what he's going to give you. I want to see what these two kids can provide. They're both 22 years old. I want to see more of Aaron Nesmith and Romeo Langford, because at that point, we could see where they're at with those two players, and maybe they're trade chips down the road if they show themselves to be good players, or they're rotational guys that are going to play 24, 26, 28 minutes a night and contribute, especially on the defensive end.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point, Sap. And I was talking about this a little bit in my post-game reaction last night. Aaron Nesmith's been buried on the bench this year, so much so that in the Orlando game on Wednesday, that was his first 3 points of the season. And then last night, Josh Richardson is hurt, so Nesmith gets some playing time, and he plays terrific. And I thought he played terrific towards the end of the season last year. And he had a strong preseason and summer league. So I was surprised to see that he's been so buried at the end of the bench, because he's, like you mentioned, he's a very adept shooter. That's why you drafted him. And I think he's a strong defender. And at bare minimum, he puts in a ton of effort on defense. You see him diving on loose balls. He brings a lot of energy. So I didn't really understand why he wasn't playing at all. And last night, Sap, more so than anybody, I think Nesmith and Langford were the reasons you won that game. It was a low-scoring game, obviously. Tatum, who we're going to talk about in a little bit more at length, was terrible. And so you really needed that energy from the bench, and Nesmith and Langford were doing it by hitting threes and giving you a lot of energy on the court. So I totally agree. I have no idea why Josh Richardson is playing not just ahead of Nesmith, but playing so much more minutes than Nesmith. I don't know if Coach Udoka is showing like due deference to veterans, or if they feel like they have to play him because they signed him to a contract extension for some bizarre reason before the season started. But yeah, I mean, I'd much rather see what Nesmith and Langford could do than Richardson. I don't understand why he hasn't played. For what it's worth, I don't understand why Pritchard is barely playing either. I think same sort of thing, gives you energy and shooting off the bench, and he's barely gotten in. Last night he just played in garbage time. So I think Coach Udoka is still figuring out rotations, and he's still a little bit overwhelmed with being a head coach, and hopefully with time that rectifies itself. But I do think last night clearly showed that some of the younger guys in the team are ready, willing, and able to contribute. They just have to get the minutes.
Is it possibly a case that Nesmith and Langford were drafted by Danny Ainge, and the organization wants to rid itself of Danny Ainge, whether it be now Brad Stevens as president of basketball operations, wants to do anything different from Danny Ainge, and maybe Ime Udoka, who was hired by Brad Stevens, and ownership wants to be different than Danny Ainge? Are they just looking at these two young kids and saying, well, those are two guys that Danny Ainge drafted, so we're not all bought into that? We see that in football all the time. You draft a quarterback, after 3 years, he's not very good. You bring in a new coach, and the coach moves on from that quarterback because it's not his guy. Maybe that happens in the NBA to a lesser extent. And again, we're not talking about elite players, but we are talking about two guys who were the 14th pick in the draft. So that should be a player that contributes, should be a rotational guy, or at least someone you can build up and eventually trade for pieces. So we've got to see them play before you do that, right? You can't just trade Romeo Langford and Aaron Nesmith without playing them, or just write them off without playing them. There's going to be some growing pains out there. I get that, but let's see what they can contribute. Their ceiling right now has got to be higher than Josh Richardson's. let's see what they're all about. Last night, it was very good. I mean, this would all be made a lot easier if your best player wasn't off to an horrific start to this season in Jayson Tatum, who is just gone backwards this year after, continually gradually getting better every year to the point now where he's a minus player. And that's really the most baffling part of the first 9 games of the season.
Yeah, I mean, and on Wednesday you won in Orlando, and again, Orlando is terrible, so we can't take that much away from the victory. But he wasn't good in that game. He had, I think, he had 14 points, but shot poorly from the field. And then last night he was basically a non-factor, and you won that game too. So I don't really understand, but that the past 2 games he hasn't contributed, and you won both of them. That's just food for thought. I really, Sap, I'm not sure what exactly is going on with him. I'd like to chalk it up to saying maybe he's hurt. He played for Team USA this summer, and so he's got more miles on him. Maybe he needed a little bit more rest. I don't know. Maybe he's upset with the rule change. Yeah, well, we can't compare him to Kevin Durant.
No, but he's also 7 or 8 years younger, so I can't buy into he's worn down. I mean, if LeBron James is worn down after playing 61,000 minutes in his career, regular season and playoffs combined, I can kind of buy into that. Right now, Jayson Tatum, we kept seeing the pictures in the offseason. He's pumping iron. He's 235 pounds. He has like the perfect basketball physique. You just blew out my eardrum, but that's okay.
Sorry about that. I don't have a sneeze button over here. I'm sorry.
No, I guess not. Hopefully you're not Aaron Rodgers and you're not going to give me COVID. But, you just kind of look at what he was supposed to be this year, and he's nowhere near that. Jet, like you said last night, 3 of 13 from the floor, 2 of 5 from 3, 10 points. Most of those points were in the fourth quarter when it was garbage time. And just look at his season so far. This is, again, 9 games, small sample, but that's all we have to go on, right? We can't announce here on the podcast that we'll pick this up after 20 games and see where he's at. After 9 games, shooting 37% from the floor, 43% on 2-pointers, 27% on 3-pointers, 74% from the line. His effective field goal percentage, which is kind of a analytic stat, is at 42%. Those are horrible numbers. Russell Westbrook, who we both admit and agree is not an effective, efficient scorer at all. His numbers are better than Jayson Tatum's. His field goal percentage this year is 44%, 50% from 2, 26% from 3, 63% from the line. His effective field goal percentage is 47%. Russell Westbrook, one of the least efficient players I've seen in the last 15 years, continues down that road this year, has actually been more efficient than Jayson Tatum. That's a problem. And then Tatum, not passing the ball the way he was last year, less than 3.5 assists. He's up to 8 rebounds a game. He should get that in his sleep. Again, 6'9", 6'10", very athletic. He gets very indifferent defensively. So, he's not helping you in other ways. Again, you brought up the rule changes. At some point, you just got to get through this and just learn how to play with the rule changes and, be better than constantly bitching to the officials, which he does more than any player in the league right now. And I know last podcast or 2 podcasts ago, you said, well, LeBron James complains a lot. Well, again, he's a different guy. We shouldn't compare him to LeBron James or Kevin Durant. I get that. But if he's being talked about as being this future MVP, he got to be a lot better than what he's shown so far this year.
Yeah. I mean, for my money, Sap, he's really only had 2 good games this year against the Rockets, which, they stink, and against Charlotte. So 31 and 41 point games. But for the rest of it, I don't think he's been very good. I mean, here's just I'll just throw out a couple of games from his 3-point stat line, Sap. 2 of 15, 1 of 8, 0 of 5, 1 of 4, 1 of 6. I mean, I know we don't have a ton of sample size, but I mean, those are horrible. I mean, that's, you can't throw the ball in the ocean. And what frustrates me about Tatum right now is he's not a smart offensive player. He's become a more selfish offensive player. Because he has the ability to make them, he takes such difficult shots, but this year he's not been hitting them. So instead of driving to the basket and getting lanes for your teammate, open shots for your teammates, or getting to the rim and getting to the free throw line, I should say, he's taking like fadeaways or contested threes, and he's bricking them. So yeah, he's been a detriment to the team this year, which should never be the case at your best player. Yeah, a lot of people, Sap, like you said, we're talking about him as a dark horse candidate for MVP this year, and he's been he's been bad. I mean, I there's no other way to put it. He's been
Shoot
bad to start the year.
27% from three. That's again
That's
Russell.
horrible.
Right? That's Russell Westbrook territory. He's shooting 74% from the free throw line. That should never be the case with Jayson Tatum. He should be minimum 80% from the line, if not 85% from the line. Jet, he's below 50% at the rim. At the rim. I'm not talking just field goal percentage or even in the restricted area. I'm talking about at the rim at 6'9", 6'10". Strong guy. It's not like he's a frail guy. It's really perplexing how he's played this year. And I'm not sure he's the one who wanted the coaching change. So he's got his guy coach. It's not like they dragged someone in that he didn't like. I'm not sure what the situation is with him. And again, I just think with him, he could be a classic player of the whole is less than the sum of his parts, right? You just look at
I think you hit it perfectly the other day when you said Carmelo.
Yeah, Carmelo. That could be him. He could have look, he'll get to the Hall of Fame. He'll make $300 million. He'll go to the Hall of Fame, and he may never win a championship. I hope Carmelo wins one this year because he's on the Lakers and he's actually playing pretty well. But he could be the Carmelo Anthony of his generation, just a guy who put up a lot of points, had some big games, but then had other games where he just disappeared. There's players that are greater than the sum of their parts, and then there are players that are less than the sum of their parts. I kind of look at Jaylen Brown and think of him as a player who is greater than the sum of his parts. There's some parts of Jaylen Brown's game that are never going to be really good. He's just not a good passer. He just isn't. He's never going to be a good passer, but he does bust his ass, does work hard in the offseason to turn his, weaknesses into strengths. With Jayson Tatum, he does seem to have all the skills, right, to be an elite player.
Yeah.
I've compared him to Paul George, and everybody always push back and go, well, he's got to be better than Paul George. Well, Paul George did finish third in the MVP voting 3 years ago. He's been, all NBA several times. He carried the Clippers to the Western Conference Finals last year and almost got them to the finals without Kawhi Leonard. I think they're similar players in some sense, and I'll say that Paul George is a better passer and a better defender than Jayson Tatum. I think Tatum is a more natural scorer, but to compare him to Paul George, everyone around Celtic Nation is like, oh no, he's much better than that. Well, let's see. Let's see him be much better than that. I've got to still see it before I believe it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think maybe the greatest example in the league of the whole is greater than the sum of its parts was the guy you're playing last night, Jimmy Butler. He's just all like piss and vinegar and, he eats nails for breakfast. That, he just gets it done by hook or by crook. He'll get you 20 plus a game, and get 8 assists, 8 rebounds. That's
a great point, Jed. Imagine
that is what he is.
Took guys and put them through, the process of scouting combine, right? Jayson Tatum, 6'9", 6'10", 235 pounds, great handle, can score at all 3 levels, smooth as all hell, right? I mean, can block shots, is a really good passer, can rebound. He can do everything on the basketball court. And you look at Jimmy Butler, who's probably 6'7". He's got a phenomenal physique. He's worked really hard to get to that point. Doesn't have a real pretty shot, not a real great 3-point shooter. He kind of plays a different style of basketball. He doesn't necessarily play a vertical game. He kind of has a little bit of an old man game to him with some really good athleticism. You nailed it, Jed. He's the guy who got the most out of his ability. He's greater than the sum of his parts, whereas I think Jayson Tatum so far is a player that's less than the sum of his parts. Now, it could click for him, but this is his 5th year. And again, by now, he should be closer to what he's going to be than where he's at right now, which is a total disappointment this year.
Yeah, no, there's no way to sugarcoat it. He's been really bad this year, and there's a reason that the team has struggled. There's multiple reasons the team has struggled, and he's chief among them, Sap. So you have to seriously try to figure out, okay, 9 games in, which like you said, not a huge sample size, but it's enough to be like, something's up here. He hasn't played well consistently. So right. Is it an injury? Is he upset with the teammate, the coach, which, the coach, he shouldn't be, he handpicked him. The rule change, something's going on. I think it's enough of a sample size to be like, there's something that's not right with this situation right now. And I don't know if he's not happy, in Boston. That's just, I don't think that's the case. He seemed, he signed the contract extension very quickly. He seems like he's got a good relationship with Jaylen Brown. I don't know. I mean, I will say that the team has gotten rid of all of his best friends in the past couple of years. Kemba Walker, Javonte Green. I know he was he was the closest with those two guys. Maybe he's upset about that.
Kyrie
I don't
Irving
know,
is,
Seth.
but
Yeah,
here's the thing
Jesus
is,
Christ.
throughout this entire process, though, all we've heard for the last 3 years, it was Kyrie's fault. So he left in free agency. Then it was Gordon Hayward's fault because he was too close to the coach. So he left in free agency. Then it was Kemba Walker because he didn't really fit in with Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum. Well, they traded him for Al Horford. Like at some point, we have to look and say Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown, I'm going to put him into that category as well. They have to be better than they are, not just statistically. I mean, Jayson Tatum by the end of the year might average 26 points per game and get a shooting percentage up to normal, but I need to see those two guys make other guys better. That's the thing I don't see with them. I also think there's this issue with this team, Jet, is that your two best players play somewhat similar styles of basketball, and they're also almost the same age, and they're both at the same level in their careers where they're trying to build their brand. They want to be all-stars. So Tatum has gone twice to the all-star game. Jaylen Brown has gone once to the all-star game. So they're concerned with that. Remember when the Big Three was put together back in 2007? Kevin Garnett had already won an MVP, was already headed to the Hall of Fame. Ray Allen was a great player. Paul Pierce was a great player. They were in their early 30s. All they cared about was winning a championship. So it fit. It worked together. And then you had a couple of great role players at that time in Rajon Rondo, who became an all-star, and Kendrick Perkins, who was the team's offensive lineman. I always called Perk like the offensive lineman. Like he made the other four guys play better because he took care of all the dirty work, picks, screens, all of that stuff. So with these guys, they're both at the same spot. And I'm sure Jaylen Brown thinks he's a better player than Jayson Tatum. And I'm sure Jayson Tatum thinks he's a better player than Jaylen Brown. Sometimes when you have two guys that are so equal, it doesn't work because they're not looking to make each other better. I think the beauty of Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen was that Pippen came into the league 3 years later and knew he wasn't Michael Jordan. There was never discussion of that. I think why it works or it can work in LA is Anthony Davis is fantastic, but LeBron's his big brother and he doesn't consider himself the equal of LeBron James. When you have two young guys who think they're better than their teammate, that can be a problem. We kind of saw that in Oklahoma City a decade ago, right? When they had Durant, Westbrook, and Harden. I'm sure those three guys kind of all looked at it and said, I'm the best player. Now, if they were being real about this, you knew Durant was the best player, Harden probably the second best player, Westbrook the third best player, but they just didn't buy into that, right? They were very young. Maybe if they had the chance to play together again, maybe they'd buy into it, although I doubt it because Russell Westbrook has never bought into anything less than him being the best player on the court, which is now a joke because he's clearly the third best player on the Lakers. But that's where it falls into, you have to kind of know your role. And maybe it just doesn't work with Brown and Tatum because they're so similar. Their games are pretty similar, not totally similar, but they're also in the same age bracket, and they're both trying to, make their way through the NBA rather than having one kind of being the alpha. We've kind of got two guys that are just trying to find their way, and there's no one really there that's good enough to lead them and
Yeah,
be that guy. Like Chris Paul. Let's say Chris Paul was here, right? He could be that leader that kind of sets the pins for that team to succeed like he did in Phoenix, where you had Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton. Now you bring in that veteran player who's a leader and gets those guys headed in the right direction.
Yeah, I think that they've certainly lacked that. And I think there were a couple guys that they were hoping were going to be that. Kemba Walker, I think really nice guy, but clearly wasn't enough of a voice or a presence to be able to get things right last year or the year prior. Same with Kyrie Irving, same with Al Horford. Even now, Al Horford in his second stint, just because you're a veteran and a good player doesn't necessarily make you a leader.
Right.
So yeah, I think they've been searching for that. And I do think that there's some redundancy between Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum. I will say this though. I think that Jaylen Brown, has worked a lot harder than Jayson Tatum in terms of how to fix the holes in his game. Cause yeah, he's not as naturally talented, but he to me is, improved every year and has become a more consistent player than Jayson Tatum. Frankly, it seems like he's a more likable person, player than Tatum because it looks like he tries harder. Some games it looks like Tatum just would rather be anywhere but the basketball court. And I'm not saying he doesn't love basketball. I believe he does, but it just seems like he just throws up his hands and was like, well, if things aren't going well for me today, I'm not gonna put in a supreme effort. And credit to Jaylen Brown, who I don't think is like that at all. But yeah, I mean, maybe the Celtics have to look. I'm not opposed to trading anybody on this team, Sap. And after the embarrassing loss to the Bulls, where they blew an 18-point lead in like 90 seconds, it seemed like. I was saying, get rid of anybody associated with the organization, and I still basically feel the same way, because the real crux of the point, Sap, is that if your building blocks, your two pillars are Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum, you can't win a championship. Period. I've seen more than enough to know that for a fact. You can add in pick any third banana in the league. If Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown are your best two players, and that's your franchise pillars, you're not going to be good enough to compete for a championship, whether it's the quality of those guys or the redundancy of their positions. That's just, you're deluding yourself if you're thinking, and the Celtics are deluding themselves if they think that that's the blueprint to get them their 18th championship. So I think you need to be open to all trade possibilities at this point. And this is the only direction that I want the Celtics to not be in, is the one they're in right now, which seems like that lower middle ground in the East, where you're not going to be bad enough to get, a franchise changing player in the draft, but you're not nearly good enough to compete for a championship. That's the worst place you could possibly be in the NBA. And so I think the Celtics need to swing big and think, take a risk. And this has been a pretty risk adverse team for a long time, Sap.
Yeah, I mean, even the free agents they were able to sign, whether it be Horford, Hayward, Kemba Walker, I mean, they're not top tier free agents. Now, Miami's been able to pull that off. They signed Jimmy Butler, and then 2 years later, they signed Kyle Lowry. And I know that the Heat got destroyed by the Celtics last night, but have we ever seen two guys who were meant to play together more so than those two? I mean, they're like
perfect fit. Mm-hmm.
Perfect fit. And again, they're veterans. Now, Lowry's won a championship. I'm sure Butler, that's his goal now. They're older guys. They've made the All-Star teams. They've made All NBA, all of that fun stuff. So now they're at the point in their careers where they just want to win. Tatum and Brown are still trying to get to that point where that's the priority. Right now, they're just trying to build their brand. I mean, Kyle Lowry would look good on a Celtics in a Celtics uniform right now. Picture him as the point guard with Tatum and Brown. I think that would be an elite team. Chris Paul, that type of player. There's not a lot of those guys in the league. However, I know you're a big fan of Ricky Rubio, but I mean, he's a level or two below those guys. Obviously, I think he's a real nuisance. I mean, he's a real negative on the defensive end, where Lowry and Chris Paul, they set the tone on defense. They're both pit bulls, but you know what I'm saying? They need that kind of veteran point guard who's more of a pass first point guard rather than a shoot first point guard, because you've got the two Jays that can score.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I threw out Ricky Rubio on Twitter the other day is just because I think he's a smart, up-tempo, point guard. And the Celtics, for some reason, I think a lot of it actually has to do with Jayson Tatum, fall in love with playing in the half court, where you're young, you're athletic, play to your strengths, run the ball, run up and down the court, run the other team off the court, get points in transition. But they fall in love with this, half court game and shooting threes. And again, I think a lot of it has to do with Jayson Tatum. I think a lot of it has to do with Marcus Smart. Because Marcus Smart loves shooting threes. He's not really an up tempo ball handling, distributing point guard. So that's why I threw Rubio out there, is I think he would be helpful. The guy I really wanted the Celtics to get in the offseason was Patty Mills. I think he would have been a great fit for this team too. And I think he's been very good for Brooklyn. I'm not looking for an all-star at that position. I just think you need somebody that fits in with the team. I've criticized Sap the past few years how the team's been constructed. I don't think it's a wisely constructed team. And I think now at this point, like I'm saying, it's become apparent to me, and I would hope it's become apparent to everybody, that you're not going to be realistically compete for a championship with this core. So my advice is to take a big swing and take a risk, trade Tatum, trade Brown for a piece that isn't the exact same. I really would like Karl Anthony Towns here. And I think that trading one of those guys, I personally, I think that Tatum is the one that should go at this point. I think he's more talented, but the Carmelo Anthony thing you said to me, Seb, it scares the hell out of me, and it resonated a lot because I, I I don't think you can win with a guy who's so talented at offense but doesn't make anybody better. And I haven't seen Tatum make anybody better in his career. And I know he's young, but a team has gotten worse almost every year since he's been on the team. That's just the case. So if you make a big trade and it fails, it blows up your face. The worst thing is that you get worse and you get closer to being a really bad team, to be in the lottery. This is the position you want to avoid at all costs, where you are right now. So there's nothing you can do to make it worse than what it is right now, in my opinion.
Yeah, you don't want to be mediocre. You want to be either a contender or fall off the cliff and go ahead and get some draft picks. But again, that's a daunting task too, because you may not get lucky. You may end up with the fourth pick as opposed to the third pick, and the difference between the fourth pick and the third pick can be huge. I mean, they were fortunate that they were able to get Tatum and Brown in back-to-back drafts at number 3, and they nailed both of them, and you go from there. That's why it's so important to see Neesmith and Langford really grow, because those are the picks you got to hit. Number 14 in the draft. Look at what Miami was able to do with similar draft picks. Bam Adebayo, who's been an all-star, played on the U.S. Olympic team. Tyler Hero's off to a great start this year. Those guys are impact players. Now you put them with Butler and Lowry. Now you get yourself a team that most of us agree is one of the best teams in basketball. So that's where you have to fill in the gaps, that you get really quality players. But, you have to see what is out there. And again, oftentimes when you trade a player that caliber, you're trading for draft picks, and then you're just hoping that those are really good draft picks. And then if that player is good with the next team he goes to, those draft picks aren't going to be all that great. So that's the part that you have to try to avoid. I mean, if you can do a 1-for-1 deal with Tatum for Karl Anthony Towns, I guess you shake it up and say, let's see what happens. Maybe Karl Anthony Towns and Jaylen Brown together are a dynamic duo, as opposed to, Tatum and Brown with a lot of redundancy there. And, they're not really helping each other get better. It's going to be interesting to see, even though it's early in the season. It's always fun to talk about this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm less upset than I was a couple of days ago, but my opinion hasn't changed even with this win over the Heat, that the team needs to shake things up in a massive way in order to, have some direction that I can feel good about, because I don't feel good about where the team is right now. Even beating Miami, I definitely don't feel like they have any realistic chance of competing in the Eastern Conference, let alone to win a championship. So, that's the goal. And right now they don't seem close to that goal. So let's see what happens. But before we finish up today, Sap, we wanted to do a quick buy or sell with a couple of teams, 2 in the West, 2 in the East. We're going to do this really fast, just to give you what our thoughts are. We'll start with the team that the Celtics beat last night, the Miami Heat. They're 6-2 to start the season. Do you buy the Heat?
Oh, I do. I buy the Heat. I mean, I picked them to go to the Eastern Conference Finals. If they made it to the finals, I would not be shocked. Butler and Lowry's perfect to lead that team. And like I've talked about, Hero, Adebayo, those are guys that are really outstanding pieces. I mean, if those are your third and fourth best players, you're on your way. And then you throw in a PJ Tucker, who does his thing, plays defense, is a leader. You got Duncan Robinson, who's a great shooter. Eric Spoelstra is one of the 3 or 4 best coaches in the sport.
Yeah,
Pat
I'd say
Riley's
so.
always ready to make a big move at the trade deadline. Players want to go to Miami. I'm all in on the Miami Heat this year.
Yeah, I also buy them. I think they're the best defensive team in the league. And that pays big dividends in the postseason when they let you play even a little bit harder. This season, they've been letting teams foul even more frequently, which plays to the Heat. That rule change plays to the Heat advantage, by the way. The less foul calls. And so I said this at the beginning of the year: if they can get consistent scoring out of Tyler Hero, which so far he has, last night he wasn't good, then they're going to be really, really, really good. That my biggest concern for them was going to be that they wouldn't be able to score enough points. But with the rule change, their defense and Hero playing well, certainly they're capable of winning the East, which to me means certainly they're capable of winning the championship. So I absolutely buy them. I think last night was just an off night for them against the Celtics. A surprising off night, but an off night nonetheless. All right, next team, Sap, will go to the Western Conference for this one. The 7-1 Utah Jazz, buy or sell?
I sell. I sell all the time with the Utah Jazz. They had the best record in basketball last year, and I never took them seriously as a title contender. They may go out and win 60 games this year, have the best record again. I just don't buy into it. I think Rudy Gobert is more of a regular season than a postseason player. Donovan Mitchell, who we both love, I mean, can he be your best player? Can a 6'2" guard be your best player and lead you to a championship, unless we're talking about Steph Curry? And also the fact that Mitchell is, as much as we love him, he's not the most durable guy. He always seems to get hurt heading into the postseason. I'm selling on the Utah Jazz. I just don't buy into it. I think there's a few teams in the West that I trust more than them.
Yeah, I mean, if you're asking me if I buy that they'll be the 1 seed in the West and maybe have the best record in the NBA, sure, I buy that. That they're totally capable of doing that, but to be realistic championship contender, absolutely not. I think people last year were deluding themselves into thinking that, or the year before, and they're a very good team, and they don't have a lot of flaws, and that plays very well in the regular season. They play great defense. They have a bunch of guys who can score, but they lack that sort of star depth that you look for in the postseason. And I like Donovan Mitchell a lot. I don't like Rudy Gobert that much. I just think that they are in the exact same position they were last year, which is, probably a second round exit. Maybe they make it to the conference finals, but that's their absolute ceiling to me. I don't think they have any realistic chance of winning a championship. I just don't. And maybe they prove me dead wrong this year, but it seems like this is going to be a recurring theme for the Jazz. Great regular seasons, disappointing postseasons. And that's something you see throughout sports. Some teams are just really great in the regular season and can't figure it out in the postseason.
Yeah, very, very much the case. I mean, the Washington Nationals for years would have the best record in baseball and bow out in the divisional round until they finally got it right and won a World Series and no one expected them. So I'm not high on the Utah Jazz. And again, they may win 60 games.
Yeah. All right. 2 more teams. Let's do the Chicago Bulls, who embarrassed the Celtics the other night. They're 6-2 to start the year. They had probably the loudest offseason of any team, Sap, adding Lonzo Ball and DeMar DeRozan and your guy, Alex Caruso, also my guy. Bulls, hot start to start the year. Do you buy or sell them?
I do buy. I don't buy them to win the championship, but I buy them to be a top 4 seed in the Eastern Conference, win a round, and then maybe lose to Milwaukee or Brooklyn or Miami. I don't think they're quite at that level, but I buy them being a team that can win in the high 40s, maybe even low 50s. I like that roster a lot. Zach LaVine continues to get better every year. I think his experience at the Olympics really helped him. DeMar DeRozan's a walking bucket, right? I mean, I've always felt like the poor man's Kawhi Leonard. He's a good defender, not quite the defender that Kawhi is. He's a great mid-range scorer and shooter, not quite as good as Kawhi, but kind of a poor man's Kawhi. Like Lonzo Ball, Vucevic is a very talented big man. And I think Caruso brings that championship DNA. I mean, he had a nice role with the Lakers when they won the title. He wasn't an essential player, but he was a role player that, I think is a winning type player. So I like the Bulls. I'm not buying them into winning a championship, but I think they'll be a 4 seed in the Eastern Conference. And maybe they play a team like the Celtics or the 76ers or Atlanta or the Knicks. And by that, I'm saying that East is pretty damn deep this year, but I think they'll be right in contention. It'll be a pain in the ass to face, to say the least.
Yeah, I think that I'm pretty much in the same mindset of you, Sep. I think they'll be, a 4 seed, maybe to a 3 seed in the East. I think they're a very fun team because they have a lot of really entertaining, sort of unique players. Zach LaVine, obviously one of the best athletes in the league. DeMar DeRozan is a phenomenal scorer. Nikola Vucevic is one of those, like the classic stretch big. He can knock down threes. And then Lonzo Ball is a very fun player to watch too. So they're an entertaining team without a doubt. And I think those pieces actually fit very well together. So it's nice to have a competitive Chicago team because it seems like, they're constantly terrible, which has been the case basically since Jordan left, with the exception of a couple of years of Derrick Rose before his knee injuries. So I think that they are a legitimate, firmly entrenched, no problem playoff team, but probably a first or a second round exit is my guess. And maybe, as this team gels, maybe next year they're even better. We'll have to see. I know that they lost Patrick Williams, who's their high draft pick last year. He's out for the year. That'll hurt them. But maybe next year when he comes back, he gives them just another layer. So it's a team I definitely think is legitimately good. And I think they've been proven to be correct to spend the money that they spent and make the trades that they made. And so I think that Chicago is a team that's not just going to be good this year, but will be good going forward for the next couple of years, which if I was a Bulls fan, I certainly take that over what it's been.
Yeah, relevant really for the first time in 10 years.
So the last team we'll do, Sap, in our buy or sell are the Golden State Warriors. They're 6-1 to start the year. And on top of the Western Conference, along with the team we mentioned before, the Utah Jazz. So last buy or sell, Golden State Warriors.
Before the season, I was in more of a sell mode, but right now I'm in the buy mode. I think obviously Steph Curry is a force multiplier. He just makes everybody on the court with him that much better. I think he and LeBron James are the two best force multipliers in the league. And Draymond Green's playing at a really high level this year. He seems to be energized. You're going to get back Thompson back, Klay Thompson back, who obviously, you know how high I am on him. I don't think he'll be quite the defender that he's been in the past, but I think he can still shoot. He can shoot in his sleep. Wiseman is going to at some point come back, gives them some versatility. I'm on with them. I just think because Steph just makes everything work. Now, last year he had an MVP caliber season. They didn't make the playoffs. They got into the play-in tournament and lost 2 games and didn't make the playoffs. But I think they're that much better this year. And then knowing that hopefully Klay comes back maybe by Christmas or shortly thereafter, he's going to give them a shot of energy. I think they're going to be right there. I mean, I think the East is better than the West right now. So, you know, you could see a Laker Golden State conference final. That would not exactly shock me. Or you could see a Golden State Denver conference final. It wouldn't shock me depending on what the hell the Lakers look like as the season unfolds. But I'm definitely buying on the Golden State Warriors. And again, Steve Kerr is a top flight coach. And again, a front office that appears to be ready, willing, and able to make a move when necessary. And they brought back a really great leader and role player in Andre Iguodala. I'm on the Golden State Warriors as a contending team this year.
Yeah, you know, they've definitely started out better than I thought they were going to. I thought they were going to be, definitely a playoff team, maybe like the 4 seed, and they're looking like they're going to be competitive for the 1 seed this year. I don't know what Klay Thompson is going to look like when he comes back. No one does, obviously. I don't know, Seb. I feel like the prime of the Warriors is about 5 years past. And so as great as Steph Curry still is, and he's still one of the best players in the league, I don't know that I buy this team as a legitimate championship contender. I think that they're a better team than I thought they were going to be, but I don't know if they can win a title as currently constituted. Now, it wouldn't shock me at all if they pair up some of these young players they have, you know, Wiseman, Kuminga, Poole looks like he's good to start the year, Moody, and get another veteran piece. And then I'd say, okay, yeah, really watch out. The Warriors might be the title favorites at this point. So I leave room for that. But I look at their schedule right now, and you know they're 6-1. Their 1 loss coming to Memphis. No shame in that. Memphis is a good team, but I don't think that they've played the most impressive schedule. Their first 2 games they beat the Lakers and the Clippers. Okay, those are both solid, but both those teams, Lakers we know have their flaws starting the year with all these new pieces. The Clippers obviously don't have Kawhi Leonard. Then you beat Sacramento. They're not particularly good. Oklahoma City, they're the worst team in the league. You lose to Memphis. You beat Oklahoma City again, and you beat Charlotte. I don't really look that they've had a victory where I can go, whoa, Golden State. They just took it to a really, really good team right now. So I'm reserving judgment. I still think that if they end the year with this same roster plus Klay and don't make a move for a veteran player, I think that they'll probably lose in the second round in the playoffs. That's my guess. So I guess I understand the hot start. I believe that they're better than I thought they were going to be, but I'm going to sell that they're a legitimate championship contender.
Well, unlike the Lakers, they haven't lost to Oklahoma City twice, despite
that's
having
bad. That's bad.
Point leads in those 2 games. I mean, that's really bad. The Lakers gave away 2 games to arguably the worst team in basketball. I mean, Oklahoma City is 2-6. Their only 2 wins came against the Lakers. And again, in those games,
horrible.
The Lakers led by 26 in one game and 19 in the other and couldn't finish it off. So that's not good for the Lakers. And again, who's going to remember this when we get to April, that the Lakers played poorly in late October, early November against Oklahoma City. Although, last year, everyone told me, don't worry, the Lakers, as long as they sneak in, no one's going to beat them. And then they got bounced in the first round because you were playing a good team in the first round in Phoenix. So I think the seeding, it does matter at some point. It doesn't make it daunting for you to try to get to the finals, that you have to beat 3 really top-notch teams just to get to the finals. I think that's really the most important thing. But I'm on board with Gold State because, again, my respect for Steph. I think he just makes everybody around him that much better. And we didn't even really talk about Andrew Wiggins, who has been a disappointment. He was the first overall pick in 2014. He's had a decent career, but he's doing what he's supposed to do with Gold State. He's a good perimeter shooter, and he's also a good defender. And that's what they ask him to do. When you get to these better teams, like you look at Miami, Duncan Robinson, you score, PJ Tucker, you defend, rebound, and be a leader. That's what you're asked to do. You do those roles. Same thing, I think, with Andrew Wiggins in Golden State, where it's like, you're going to be a 3-and-D guy. Do that, and you're going to help us win. And that's what he's able to do.
Yeah, and they've gotten big contributions from Jordan Poole and Damian Lee, who have scored for them, while Clay's out. So, listen, I think their player development's working really, really well. And they're a top-notch organization, so that shouldn't surprise anybody. But listen, Sap, they're better than I thought they were going to be. But I would like to see them as the schedule goes on, and as some of these older guys like Draymond and Steph have to play more games, and there's attrition. We'll see. So I think that they're a team that's certainly because of the history and the guys on it. I think once they start winning games, people start immediately saying, "Oh, they're going to be a championship contender." I'm just saying I want to wait and see a little bit longer, but that's just what I think, Sap. So that's going to do it for us here at the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap. We are, as always, presented by Full Press Coverage. Make sure you check out their website, and make sure you check out our socials if you want any more information about the show or any more information about Sap's deteriorating relationship with Aaron Rodgers, who continues to be an a-hole, even going so far as to double down and saying he's a victim of cancel culture. Sap, I don't know why you still like that guy, but that's your choice. And
I can't quit him. I'm like Jake Gyllenhaal in Brokeback Mountain. I can't quit him.
But I advise you to follow at John Sap 25, and see exactly what's his feelings are. Maybe they'll change. I think it's a toxic relationship that you're in, Sap. So hopefully
we're working through it. We're through it, Chet. It's difficult. He's complicated. I'm complicated. Everyone's complicated.
He's an a-hole is what he is. And you can follow me at Jet Stryer on Twitter. Also the show, if you aren't watching on YouTube, youtube.com/Jet Stryer. If you want to just listen to it, download it, take it on your phone, play it in your car, wherever podcasts are found, just type in the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we will talk to you next week. See ya.